Notre Dame fans, welcome back to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and we have a special guest today. We're going to be sitting down talking ball with Notre Dame defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman. Coach Freeman, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me, Brian, man. I look forward to getting on here talking a little ball.
Yes, that's what I want to do, Coach. You know, a lot of the questions this summer that you've been getting, and the interviews have gone over incredibly well. The one you did with Coach Chris Zorich went incredibly well. A lot of stuff about how you got to Notre Dame and that process. But Coach, you know me, I want to talk ball. Those are great stories, but I want to talk some ball. So let's start off with this, Coach. You and I are at a coach's clinic, and I introduce you in front of the coach's clinic, and the first thing you're asked to do is, just in a general sense, what is your defensive philosophy? So independent of 3-3-4 versus or 3-3-5 versus 4-2-5 versus whatever else, just your overall defensive philosophy, what would you say that it is?
Well, I think we break it down to this. We are front multiplicity coverage consistency. And so that's kind of philosophy in everything we do here. Okay, is we want to be multiple up front. We want to be a 3-down team. We want to be a 4-down team. We want to STEM. We want to be a 4-eye team. All these different terminologies, but we're going to move and do different things up front. And then we want to be consistent in the coverages that we play. We don't want to have 1,000 different coverages. We're going to have multiple coverages, but we're not going to try to confuse you with playing 10 coverages. We're going to be consistent in the 5-6 coverages that we play so that our guys can play fast and they can understand exactly what we're doing and exactly how teams try to attack us. And that's going to help us play faster.
Now, you brought up, I was going to talk about this later, but you kind of went into it now. So let's, if you don't mind me kind of transitioning into that, you talked coverages, breaking down film at Cincinnati. There was obviously some multiplicity there. You weren't like lined up in cover one every single snap, but you were aggressive with your coverages. Is that something that's a part of your philosophy? Was that basically more on that's just the person they had at Cincinnati? And if it is kind of what you want to be, do you feel like you have inherited a roster at Notre Dame that allows you to kind of just keep right at that, or do you have to adjust some things to fit what you have?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some similarities, that the things we did at Cincinnati that we'll do here, but there's also going to be some differences because of our personnel and because of what our guys do well. We want to be an aggressive group, though. That's not going to change. That's our mentality. We want to dictate. Okay. And what we do is we say we got this thing called challenge everything. And a part of that mantra of challenge everything is the way we play defense. And I hope our guys feel like, hey, Coach Freeman's an aggressive coach. We're going to be an aggressive unit. Yes, does that mean play man? Yeah, but it doesn't mean we're going to play man every snap. We're going to play some zone. We're going to do different things, but I still want to be able to challenge you. I'm not going to drop 8 guys in the coverage and say, hey, let them throw it in front of us and let's just break down and tackle it. No, we want to challenge routes. We want to challenge our opponents, and we want to make them earn everything they get.
When we got a chance to interview the players in the spring, there was a lot of talk about things being simplified, and that can often get misconstrued as you guys have 2 calls and you just kind of run to the ball. What I kind of want to hear from you, Coach, is, how do you balance as a coach being complex enough to be able to have all the answers that you would need in a game versus making things simplified enough to allow your players to execute at a high level? Because you and I both know that ultimately at the end of the day is the most important thing. You can have all the chalkboard or whiteboard answers you have, but if the players can't execute it. So how do you balance, those 2 needs when you go into playing the kind of schedule that you're going to be playing this year?
It's been a long time since I used a chalkboard. I might have been elementary, so I like what you think.
Well, we talked about where I started coaching. You're very familiar. We had chalkboards, right?
So. No doubt, man. But, I think if you look back at our last 3 years at Cincinnati, okay, and you saw the success we had statistically and as a defense. And I think if you went back and you asked those players, hey, what is it about Coach Freeman's defense that you enjoyed? And I think they would say it's simplified or whatever. You can play fast, and that's what I believe in. And I believe in this, and that this is a personnel driven game. And anybody that tells you otherwise, I think I want to see exactly what they're doing to have some success, because I bet you their players are extremely talented and they play extremely hard. And that's what I believe in, man. I believe in we have to continue to develop the talent we have, and we have to continue to try to bring in the best players that we can find that fit Notre Dame, because ultimately those are the guys that have to go out there and be better than their opponent. And yes, we want to have a good scheme that takes away what the offense is doing well. Yes, we want to have a scheme that isn't just you go and you know exactly what we're doing. But at the end of the day, we're not going to win because we out-schemed our opponent. That's not what I want to do. That's not what I believe. And I believe we have a sound scheme. I believe that we're multiple in the things we do. But at the end of the day, we're going to win because our guys are coached better, developed better, and they execute exactly what their assignment is better than their opponent. And so that's, to me, the keys to our success.
When you've talked about your defense, kind of big picture, and when people ask, especially ask about the defensive line, you've made the comment that we're a defensive line driven defense. And I've heard you say that multiple times now. Can you explain, Coach, kind of what that means and what does that look like? Practically speaking, what does that look like?
Yeah, I was just talking about this with the D staff, and that in all the years of either being a coordinator or coaching football, the most successful defense I've been a part of, it was because we had a really good D line. And that's what I want our guys to understand, is that our D line can erase a lot of mistakes from guys behind them. There can be a wide open receiver. There can be a hole that all of a sudden this D lineman makes a play and it's like, oh man, look at this great defensive call. No, it's just a D lineman whooping somebody's tail. And as long we are deep at D line here. And I believe that that's probably the strongest unit we have on our defense right now. And it's for sure the most experienced unit. And with a strong D line, I believe the guys behind them have opportunities to catch up to that talent level or catch up to that experience level. And we will always be a D line driven program and a D line driven defense. And that's going to be what we hang our hat on.
So when you're putting together what your responsibilities are for the second level and your coverage aspects, I know that the specific talent of those positions goes into that, but does the talent, or I'd say talent probably is not the right word, but the ability of your front to be disruptive, does that then impact, or how much does that impact sort of then what you do at levels 2 and 3 of your defense?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing the simplest example is to show you that if you have D linemen that can defeat one-on-one blocks, then you don't really have to pressure to get pressure on the quarterback. You don't have to blitz to get pressure on the quarterback, right? If all of a sudden, hey, your 4 D linemen, okay, are getting blocked by 4 O linemen and they got an extra guy, well, in order to get pressure on a quarterback, you're going to have to bring a 5th or 6th rusher, okay? And so that's a huge aspect of it. If we can get 4-man pass rush, okay, when that quarterback drops back and he's looking down the field and he's uncomfortable, then that puts an extra guy in the coverage. Okay, but all of a sudden, if you can't get 4-man pass rush, you need to blitz 5. Well, then guess what? You're going to be getting hopefully more pressure, but also you're going to have some vulnerabilities in the back end. There's going to be more holes. And so it's basic math in that hey, if we can get pressure and we can create havoc with 4 guys up front, then there's a lot of different things we can do in coverage with 7 guys.
Does that then make your blitz packages more impactful because this is an expression I've used in the past, is when you can blitz because you want to, not because you have to? Does it then does it then say, okay, well, when we do blitz now, it's more impactful because we're able to eat up more gaps and more blockers? Does that kind of factor into it or not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now that you don't feel like you have to blitz to get pressure on the quarterback, now when you decide to bring pressure, I think offenses can continue to be off track. Well, if they know, hey, only way he's going to get pressure on the quarterback is if he blitzes guys. Well, they know, hey, when it's a passing down, he's probably going to blitz because he needs to get pressure on the quarterback. But all of a sudden, you don't know when now. Now we can keep you off track, keep you off balance. We can blitz first, second, third down. It doesn't matter. We cannot blitz and still get pressure and be effective. And so that goes back to the whole philosophy that we have to have a strong D-line to have success on defense.
You look at the linebackers, obviously. Well, actually, this will probably set up the linebacker talk a little bit better. But, since you've been hired, there's the conversation of 4-2-5 versus 3-3-5 versus 3-4 personnel, all those different things with people we like to spend a lot of time on. When you look at those different things, and you talked about multiplicity, so the answer to that is, are you going to be 4-2-5, 3-3-5, 3-4? Let me guess, your answer is yes, right?
Yes to every single one.
but what are the things that go into determining what your emphasis is going to be? Is it a combination of, or one of these things, which is personnel driven? Obviously, your personnel. Is it going to be basically, okay, we may do one thing versus USC, but another thing versus Wisconsin, or is it going to kind of like everybody's going to see everything?
There's going to be things we hang our hat on. And I think you have to have that. I think you have to have a staple. I think you have to have a base defense. And if you can't stop an offense in base defense, right, then all of a sudden, really, you're really just guessing. You're guessing. And so we have to be able to hang our hat on some type of base defense. But I think when you look to each team and you look to game plan, you say, hey, where are there, one, deficiencies, right? Where can we attack? But two, what do they do really, really well? And how can we stop that? You want to make a team be left-handed, right? And we use that term just to make them do things that they don't love to do. And that's when I go back to the mindset we want to be able to dictate to the offense and not be dictated from the offense. And so I think we look at each week, hey, what are the deficiencies? What do they do really, really well? How can we attack the deficiencies? And how can we try to stop the things they do really well? And then try to see how that fits within our scheme, right? Hey, this week it might look like 3-3-5. Okay, it might look like 4-2-5. What do we need to do to make sure we're stopping the things they do well and attacking what they don't?
One of the advantages to playing in a conference is a lot of times you see the same teams over and over again. And in some instances, it's not completely true, but you're going to see certain big picture philosophies over and over again when you play in a conference. At Notre Dame, however, you're going to play an AAC one week, a Big Ten the next week, a Pac-12 the next, Navy the next. How important is it? Is it even more important to have that multiplicity to where if we need to be 3 down one week to thrive, we can be that, and if the next week we need to be 4 down more, we can thrive because of just the vast difference in sort of philosophies and schemes you're going to see week to week, as opposed to maybe. And again, it's not teams you're seeing every year, right? Like if you're in the AAC, yeah, you play different offenses every week, but it's, a lot of the same teams year after year. We have a book on them. How important is that when you play this kind of cross country schedule and then the unique schedules every year at Notre Dame?
I think the really one of the more important things we have to do is start preparing when we have more time, right? And so in the summer, being able to kind of go through your schedule and look and see, hey, where are the uniquely different offenses at, and who are you playing that this offense is going to be unique in terms of what they're going to do, and how do we within our scheme, within our package, find a defense that fits us well to take away what they're going to do. And obviously, you have the Navies. The triple option defense is going to be completely different than anything else you've done. Okay, but then you have the RPOs, the air raid type UCFs, the USCs and the North Carolinas, and even, then you got your traditional, you can have a quarterback that can run versus a quarterback can throw. Cincinnati obviously has a dual threat guy. And then Toledo's a 11, 12, one of the top offenses in the MAC. And I'm just talking, the list goes on and on. Then you play Wisconsin. You're going to get 12, 11, 13, shift, motion. And it's like, man, you have to have plans. So what I like to do is in the summer kind of sit down with the staff and we'll game plan a little bit, take really good notes, and be able, once we get to that, we can say, hey, when we looked at this in the summer, here's the kind of thoughts we had going into this game. Now, where are we at? Right? We could be a completely different defense, okay, by the time we play some of these teams. But I think what it does is helps give you ideas for what you think would be in your benefit, obviously, as you go into that game.
You talked about UNC and USC and UNC back-to-back. You have them in back-to-back games. They're both air raid teams. But this is what makes, I think, defensive coaching challenging is there's the air raid version that USC runs where they were under 100 yards rushing a game last year. And then there's the air raid version that North Carolina did, who had 2,000-yard running backs. So it's not like you can say, okay, back-to-back air raids, game plan here will be the one we use next week. And that's what I think, especially for defensive coordinators, that can make it very challenging because you can't just say West Coast because, Mike Shanahan's West Coast is going to look a lot different than John Gruden's West Coast. You can't just say air raid because, Mike Leach's air raid is going to look a lot different than Phil Longo's air raid.
That's right. That's right. And it's still that, I think, Brian, it still comes down to personnel. You know what I mean? And you say all those things, and I think about, I wonder why Phil Longo ran for so many yards last year.
It's called Javonte Williams and Michael Carter.
Right. Exactly right. And that's why I think what intelligent coaches do is they put their best players in positions to be successful, right? And they do things. If you got a really good player, you know what? Utilize them, because no scheme for account for somebody going and put their hands on somebody, throwing them to the ground, getting off a block and making a tackle. Well, the scheme looked good. It wasn't a scheme. That ain't anything I called. It's my guy whooping your guy, And so that's why again, recruiting so important. That's why developing that guy is so important. That's why having the best players on the field are so important.
When you're a first-year coordinator, how challenging can it be to sort of put your package together as you're still learning your personnel? Or is this one of those years you have to rely even more on Mike Mickens and more on Mike Elson and Chris O'Leary, guys who've been in the system, maybe know these players? Or do you feel like you can study film and then you have spring ball that you can have you can go into fall camp feeling like you have a pretty good idea of who you are?
Yeah, it's funny you said first year coordinator. I thought back to 2017. Okay, in 2017, and this is going to answer the question you just had, but 2017, you're hired as the defense coordinator at Cincinnati, and you think you have all the answers. You're 30 years old, and we have all these different coverages, and I'm in front of the room, and I'm telling everybody, this is what we're doing, the D-line, linebackers, the safeties, the corners, everybody, this is what we're doing. I'm the coordinator, and you finish 96 in the country at defense, right? And so you have to figure out some things that are going to help you have more success. You're going to be fired. And so one of the things we changed was what we call unit strength here, is that, hey, man, the D-line coach, the head coach, D-line, linebacker coach, head coach, linebackers, corner, safety is the same thing. And so that is something that I feel is important for our success in the way I lead, in that, hey, Elston, I'm going to lean on Elston really, really hard to make sure that I know what's going to be best for the D-line and their personnel, what they do well. Same thing with Mike Mickens at corner. Same thing with Chris O'Leary at safety, okay? And that, man, I have to depend on my staff. I have to depend on these guys I work with. They're professionals at what they do, okay? And I trust them, and they're really good at what they do, or they wouldn't be coaches at Notre Dame, okay? And so I really depend on these guys. I utilize them, and this is a group thing. We're doing this thing together. This is not Marcus Freeman's deep. This is us together, putting our heads together and figuring out what's going to help our rooms and our defense have success.
And obviously, you're just not the D coordinator. I mean, you don't just get a roam practice all day, with the bird's eye view. You also have to work with the linebackers.
Yeah.
Sort of, when you look at a sort of big picture, what role do linebackers have in this defense? Because we talk a lot about the defensive line driven, and then there's the aggressive coverage schemes, and then there's this group in the middle. That when I studied you guys last year, Sanders got a lot of attention, Ahmad Gardner got a lot of attention, but I'm watching your linebackers. I'm saying these guys are a pretty important part to what they're doing. Mm-hmm. What's the role of the linebackers in this defense, or in how you utilize them? What role they have, what's their emphasis have to be when you're talking about when this defense is really clicking, this is what the linebackers are being asked to do and what they're doing well?
I think a unique thing about our defense is obviously the coordinator is the linebackers coach. And sometimes I try to coach them from a coordinator's point of view. I want them to know what I'm thinking, why I'm thinking it, what I'm calling, why I'm calling it. Because now what the linebackers can do is try to do little things that help other positions, right? Hey, the safety has this guy, man, but we want to make sure we give him some help. So you should be standing here. This is why I'm calling it. Hey, this pressure, the D lineman's doing this. So if you show right here, the D lineman can get free and you can come off behind him and different. I'm just trying to give you different examples, but what I hope they can do is be an extension of me, right? Their number one job is to be a great linebacker, okay? If they hear it over and over and over from a coordinator's point of view, which is a lot of times the way I coach and I teach and I watch film, I think what they can do is be a extension of me, but help every position have success, right? Do little things that, are going to help each position be able to accomplish their job.
Coach, and when you look at your linebackers, sort of what's your impression of where things stand with that group heading into fall camp? You've got a lot of guys that have played, maybe not a ton of guys that have started for a long period of time, but you have a lot of guys that can play. What's your impression about where things stand? What are the things you feel this unit is going to do well, and what are some of the things that you're going to have to spend the next 25 or whatever practices, getting that group better at as you get ready for Florida State?
Yeah, I think it's a deep position. I think it's a position where you got a lot of guys in that room that can play, that have played some ball. Obviously, Drew White started the most games, but you got a lot of guys that have played some ball for Notre Dame. And the unique challenge for me is going to be able to, how do I get these guys on the field? because we have more than just 3 guys or 2 guys that can just play, right? And so how do we get these guys on the field? How do we make sure that we're playing at a high level no matter who's on the field, right? It's that natural instinct, that natural selfishness that can creep into you, right? And that's a huge challenge of mine. It's going to be a huge challenge of many coaches on our defense is that, hey, how do we continue to get the what's best for me out of me and keep this room, okay, doing for what's best for the room. And that's one of my huge challenges because we have a lot of talent and we have a lot of guys that can play and a lot of guys that want to play. But at the same time, we have to make sure, man, that we can only play 3 linebackers at once. We might have 6, 7 guys that can play. You only play 3. Okay. And so that's my biggest challenge is I'm extremely satisfied with the talent we have. It's being able to get them on the field, and when they're not on the field, make sure that, hey, there's nothing more important than the production and the success of this defense.
I have a bit of a follow-up on that, Coach. Obviously, the preference for any coach is you want all your guys to be able to do everything well, right? But that's not always the reality. Is it possible, because it sounds great sitting in a podcast on a Tuesday afternoon just talking about it, well, this guy does this well, this guy does this well, so you can just kind of put them in there and do those kind of things. At the same time, if you do that too much, teams will know, okay, that guy only does this well. But is it possible for you to take, whether it be a veteran or a younger guy that says, hey, maybe he's not a great all-around player, but he does this 1 or 2 things really well. Can you fit that into your scheme, or does it limit you? I mean, how can you kind of look at those different strengths of players and say, hey, we can use that on a Saturday?
Yeah, you got to find, I think one thing I take pride in is finding figuring out what these guys do well, right? I think it's easy to look at a kid, and if he's not the All-American or he's not the no-brainer starter and say, he's not good enough. We missed. Right? There's a reason why these kids are at Notre Dame. They all have talent. They all were really successful in high school, and it's our job to make sure that we figure out what that kid can do well and put him in a position to do it well. Now, you're not going to hurt your defense. A kid only blitzes well, okay, then blitz him, but also make sure that you're moving them to different places and making sure that, hey, they don't know what he's doing or exactly where he's going every time he's in the game. But I think that's a challenge of ours, and that's something I'm really hard on is just to make sure, hey, find out what he does well. Let's figure it out. Let's figure out what these kids do well and put them in a position to have success instead of saying he's not good enough. Okay, and that's a huge challenge of us coaches is to make sure we really dive in deep to these kids and figure out, hey, what are the things that they do really well.
I had a final linebacker question for you, Coach. Is you look at the rover depth chart, you obviously got Jack Kaiser and Paul Moala, Isaiah Pryor. I'm not sure if Prince Colley's going to be there or not. I'm not quite sure where he's going to start out at. But is it easier for them to kind of step into the quote-unquote Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's shoes because it's not the same defense or it's a different coordinator, or does that pressure remain the same no matter what? Because, they're not being technically asked to run the same thing because it's a different coordinator and a different defense. But does that pressure still remain the same, or does it kind of take a little bit of that burden off knowing that, this is a kind of a fresh start kind of thing?
Yeah, I've told the Rovers this from the beginning is that there's only one Jeremiah Owusu, and you're not going to replace Jeremiah Owusu with one guy, right? He's a unique talent. He's an exceptional football player. And what we have to do is replace his production. That could be with 2 guys. That could be with 3 guys. That could be with 1 guy. I don't know. This is going to be how you continue to develop these guys. But I hope they all have that competitive nature where they put the pressure on themselves. Like, I want to be Jeremiah Owusu. I want to be the guy that's on the field that everybody fears. I want to be the guy that never comes off the field, because that's, to me, the competitiveness that drives us all to be great. And that's what I challenge these guys to understand. Hey, we can't be selfish, but we can be greedy. Okay, we can want the most. We can want all the success. We can want to never come off the field. But the minute it turns to greed, the minute it turns into selfishness instead of being greedy, okay, that's when all of a sudden you put your own success ahead of the unit or ahead of the team, and we can't do that. So it is a challenge to them. I think they all personally challenge themselves. It's a challenge for me to make sure we replace the production of Jeremiah Owusu with the guys we have, because he was a huge part of this defense last year. But you know what I mean? At the same time, we got to make sure that the expectations don't change no matter who's on the field.
We kind of started this thing early on talking about defensive line driven and being able to make individual plays and win. Obviously, we've seen a lot of Kurt Hinish over the years at Notre Dame. We've seen a lot of Myron Tungavaloa, so even though he's going to look a little different, be playing in a little different position this year. Two guys I wanted to ask you about that one is Jason Adamiola, obviously a guy that's been sort of a rotation player. As you look for, guys that can win those one-on-one matchups, what's your message to him been as far as what kind of player he can be in that kind of role and what kind of expectations there are for him in that position also to say, look, because this is what I've always felt like the guys that are closest to the quarterback are the dudes in the middle, right? And with the the advent of quick game and things like that, if you can get pressure right up the middle, it's going to be real disruptive against the run and the pass. He's a guy that can kind of be that. What's your thoughts on? That's my impression. What is your thoughts on him? What is your expectation of him, and kind of what's your message been to him as he steps into a more prominent role this year, or is pushing to step into a more prominent role, I should say?
Yeah, Jason had an unbelievable spring. And I didn't know much about him. I mean, again, you watch a little bit of film, you watch last year's film, and he sticks out. I mean, he's a guy that was productive when he was on the field, and he's a guy that plays at a high level. And the most impressive thing I loved about Jason from the 15 practice spring is the effort that he practices with. And there's no wonder you see some of those plays in the game where he's chasing the guy from Florida State down. He does a helicopter. He does that in practice. And so, again, he's going to have a prominent role on this defense, and he's going to be a huge reason why we have success. And I don't know how many plays he's going to play. I don't care if it's 30, 40, whatever we need. But we just want to make sure those plays that he's in the game, that he's playing at a high level, and that comes from preparing at a high level.
I think a guy on the defensive line that is a bit of an enigma at this point in time, maybe that might not be the right word, but that's Isaiah Foskey. Because if you're talking about, okay, I'm going to draw up a lineman in a lab, he's going to be about 6'5", 250, really long arms and really athletic. Oh, that kind of fits Isaiah Foskey, but he's also a guy that really, until Notre Dame convinced him to play D-line, was a guy that people thought was going to be a tight end. So he's still an evolving guy. Have you seen any growth from him from kind of day one to now? And what are the areas that he needs to continue to grow to turn that potential into production?
Yeah. Foskey's probably one of maybe two players that had the biggest growth from the start of spring practice to the end of spring practice. And again, he's a guy with super high expectations. And probably one of the big reasons is because of the way he looks. I mean, he looks like a Greek god. I mean, it's unbelievable. You've sculptured an actual perfect defensive end for what we're asking him to do. And so he's continuing to – he's been here for a couple of years, but he hasn't had a whole bunch of game reps. I don't consider him a veteran. And so I know Elston's been working extremely hard with him on the technique aspect of playing defensive line. He's still relatively new, as you said, to the position and still learning. But all the tools are there, and now it's our job to continue to develop him, right? If you don't have the tools, well, it's hard to develop. You know what I mean? He has the tools that are being developed, and he's done tremendous in 15 practices, and I expect a lot of production, a lot of great things out of him coming this season.
We've all seen Myron Tungavaloa as a 3 technique. We know what he can do. He's been playing since his freshman year back in 2017. What was the adjustment like for him moving from 3 technique? Obviously, his body looks different now, right? So you're able to kind of maybe take off some pounds that he had a hard time keeping on anyway. But he's going to look physically a little different. But how was the transition for him playing further away from the ball, playing on the edge, those kind of things from him this spring? And what role do you see him playing for your defense this year?
Yeah, I don't have a whole bunch to compare him off of, right? I wasn't here last year in those years that he played D tackle. I've watched film, but there's only so much value you put in the film versus what you see live. And what I've seen live is a dominant defensive end. In 15 practice, he's been dominant, he's been disruptive, and has done an unbelievable job. And that's my expectation for a guy that's a returning starter. And so I think he's going to have a great year. The transition's been really good. He looks good. He's been playing fast. He's been working his tail off. And it's exciting to see what he's going to do at this new position. But again, The only judgments I get to make is from the 15 practices I've seen him live, and that's what I know him as. I know him as a defensive end, and I know him as a guy that you can move to tackle. You can move him inside, outside, do some different things. So teams don't always know where he's going to be, but he's been disruptive and dominant.
We'll wrap up here, Coach, with we've talked a lot about the defensive line, linebackers. We've in our shows in the past, we've talked a lot about the corners. Kyle Hamilton certainly gets a lot of attention, All-American safety, tremendous talent. I know you haven't coached him yet, so we won't necessarily get to that yet. But there's a player I did want to ask you about. And one of the first marks that you made when you got to Notre Dame was your first recruiting win as a player you can talk about. And that's Houston Griffith. So what have you seen? Obviously, you're involved in getting him because you build up the depth chart and all that. But what have you seen from Houston since you actually started working with him from a football standpoint? And what kind of role, what kind of expectations do you have for him in this defense this season?
Yeah, I mean, Houston's a guy that you respect because the minute he made the decision to come back, he's been 100 miles an hour. Right? He's been 100 miles an hour finding ways to improve. He always wants to watch film. He always wants to meet with Coach O'Leary. He always wants to say, Coach, tell me how I get better. And that's, to me, what you want, right? You want guys that seek feedback. They seek improvement. And that's what I've seen out of Houston. And if you continue to have that mentality, you're only going to continue to improve. He had a great spring, right? I think you see him in positions that he can accomplish what he's being asked to do. And so I expect him to be a huge part of our success that we have on defense. He's going to play a tremendous amount, and it's going to be really exciting as we go into fall camp. Now you have Kyle back, you have Houston and DJ and KJ and Litchfield. You got all these guys that, hey, now we get to continue to see more depth, but also you got a little bit of that competition where you're going to see who rises when the competitiveness comes out.
Speaking of that position, and this is more big picture, not specifically Houston or anybody else, because as you said, there's going to be a competition. But I would imagine most offensive coordinators are going to say, hey, that number 14 kid's pretty good. We may not want to throw at him 20 times a game, so let's take our chance with the other guys. Is that something that's expressed to them? Do they already know it? And how important is it for that second safety position to be effective? Because as you look at the different saying, well, we don't want to throw at that guy. Well, then what's your other options? To throw at that guy. I mean, so how important is that position and those guys knowing, hey, look, people are going to come after you. You got to be ready. You have to execute at a high level.
Yeah, that's the reality of it. Kyle Hamilton has built a reputation of a guy you probably don't want to attack too much. And so because of that, the other safety better be ready to roll. And if you're an extreme competitor, like I know these guys are, that's what you want. Like, challenge me. Come on. Come after my side because I'm going to make you pay. And I think those guys have embraced that challenge. And it's in a great group. Coach O'Leary's done a great job with that room and developing the confidence, developing the depth, and obviously developing the production from spring when Kyle's not there. And so I'm excited to see what is going to happen as we go into the fall and see a new Kyle Hamilton's out there and see, hey, you got some competition for the other spot, but there's also the competition to be, the 1B at each position. We can't play 11 guys. We can't only play 11 guys, and that's not a philosophy of mine. We're going to try to play our top 22 guys, and we have a philosophy of having 1As and 1Bs because of the expectations as you play at such a high level. Your effort is so high that you're not going to be able to play 60, 70, 80 plays, And the other thing is we got some really good players. You know what, Kyle Hamilton, you got to be down this series. Take a breather this series. We're going to get the next best guy in, okay? And he's going to go in there, and the expectations or the execution isn't going to lower. And so that's a way for me to get these guys to understand that there's not just 11 guys that are going to be the reason we have success on this defense. It's going to be a top 22, if not 24 guys, man, that make sure that we're rolling guys. We're all playing at a high level, and it's going to be definitely a total unit feel.
Last question about the safeties, Coach, and you can disagree with this, and you can explain to me how I'm wrong. So this is not you have to accept my premise, okay? So I feel like the advent of RPOs and spreading field teams out that we've seen, especially really come on the last 3-4 years. I mean, they've been around for a while, but it's really become a prominent. I feel like it stresses safeties more than any other position on defense. You look at that in your position, how important is it for you that you have safeties that can play in space, can cover, and can play the run? and how important, like, what does it do for your defense if you have guys that can do all those things at a high level?
That's what you have to be able to do at the safety position now. You hit the nail on the head, in that corner's got to be able to cover. Yeah, you got to tackle a little bit, but you got to be able to cover. D lineman got to be able to stop the run and go after the passer. That safety, and especially what we do, has to be able to play man coverage, has to be able to play the middle of the field, has to be able to play some type of too-high coverage, has to be able to fit in the box and be able to make tackles versus teams that play 11, 12 personnel, right? And so it's not easy to find that, because sometimes they have a strength at one, and all of a sudden you go ask them to play man coverage, and they can't play man coverage. Okay, then all of a sudden maybe, hey, he's a great cover guy, but does he really, fit in the box and be able to trigger in close space when you need him to? And so it's really, really difficult to find a guy that's uniquely talented at all those different traits. Fortunately, I think they've done a great job here in recruiting, and these guys have the ability to do those things that we're going to ask them to do. And guess what? If they can't do the things we ask them to do, well, then us as coaches have to change what we're asking them to do. And that's where we're not so bullheaded and saying, if you can't do this, then what do we do? Well, what are you going to do? You can't just blame it on the players, right? And that you got to be able to, as a coach, be able to find a way to put these unbelievable, talented individuals in a position to have success. And that's going to be our challenge, and that will continue to be our challenge.
Well, that's a great way to end it, Coach. And I appreciate you joining the Irish Breakdown podcast today. That's going to do it for this interview with Coach Freeman. Make sure that you check it out. Give us a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as always, check out irishbreakdown.com. Coach Freeman, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy these last few days before things get really crazy here when players come back and report and get ready for camp.
No doubt the time's coming, man. Thanks, Brian. It was fun.
Thanks, Coach.